Alright, Trekkies and Trekkers, time for final episode review of the day, which is the Maquis Part 1. While Cardassian fighter, the Bacchanor is stalking at Deep Space Nine, a human posing as a Starfleet maintenance worker tampers with a nearby wall panel. At Ops, Dax tells Kira she has a dinner date with the Galamite Captain Baudet. Kira expresses unease at dating someone with a transparent skull, through which she can see his brain, and they do have a brief verbal exchange over choice of dates and aesthetics. Docking clamps and her pylon are released, but Dax picks up an anomaly. She tells the Buccaneer to shut down their engines. Unfortunately, the freighter explodes while leaving the station. Jadzia Dax informs Major Kira that there is nothing left of the freighter. A subsequent investigation reveals no signs of explosive devices or other obvious methods of sabotage, but traces of marcassium, a compound unique to the United Federation of planets, are found in the debris of the Bacchanor. Although the explosion may have been an implosive protomatter device, O'Brien informs Sisko that he cannot be sure. Starfleet sent Calvin Hudson, a ranking officer and attaché to the demilitarized zone along the Cardassian border, and an old friend of both Sisko and Dax, to the station to investigate the possibility of retaliatory attacks. After a few introductions, they talk in Sisko's office. He briefly catches up with Sisko, but the gravity of the situation comes back. He admits his belief that his presence on the border is a joke. His assignment has been to help colonists, whose land the Federation gave to Cardassia, adjust to the new circumstances. He believes that the Federation is abandoning them due to a bad treaty, clearly in disagreement. Contrary to Starfleet's belief, Hudson is sure the Cardassians will not retaliate, but he guarantees a response will come, since the Cardassians never show anyone what they are really planning. Meanwhile, a covert meeting takes place between the Saboteur and a Vulcan on the promenade. Pretending to read a directory sign, the Vulcan whispers that he has quarters while a ship arrives for him to escape. The Vulcan then visits Quark to offer him a business proposition. He assumes it's due to an early bad deal he made with the Vulcans, but when she assures him that's not the case, he's immediately excited. Introducing herself as Sakona, she insists it should be a private meeting, so they plan to meet later for dinner. However, Sakona and the Saboteur were observed from above by a Pleiadian couple. Later, they abduct him in the habitat ring as he goes to his quarters. When Sisko returns to his quarters that evening, he finds Skull Dukat waiting for him. Sisko immediately asks where Jake is, saying bluntly he believes Dukat is capable of anything. Dax says he's personally hurt by that, so Sisko calls through his combat for Major Kira to find him, but does not alert her to Dukat's presence for the moment. Dukat explains that Cardassian Central Command is unaware of his presence on DS9, as he came aboard unregistered on a cargo ship. He has come officially to help Sisko find the truth about the destruction of the freighter, for he believes he knows what happened. Renegade Starfleet officers. In order to find the truth, the two of them must take a runabout to the Volan colonies in the demilitarized zone, which Dukat describes as not so demilitarized, I'm afraid. Sisko agrees to go, taking Dukat's intentions at his word. On the way, Dukat continues conversation, politely challenging the fact he is not able to help pilot the runabout, and not able to even see his controls. They're not illuminated, preventing as much knowledge of his operation from Dukat's memory. They also talk about aspects of Cardassian education, obviously more intense Federation, at the expense of having free time. Sisko barely responds to him, but then he receives a distress call from a Federation merchant vessel, attacked by two Cardassian attack vessels. Dukat says they are not authorized to violate the treaty and must have come from Cardassian colonies. He tries two direct hails, but they do not disengage. Before the runabout can intervene, another Federation vessel arrives and quickly destroys the Cardassians. Sisko doesn't recognize the ship, as it appears to have been modified to carry photon torpedoes. The discovery there has been fighting going on without the two governments knowing about it. Back on the station, Quark has arranged a business dinner with Sakona. She is eager to begin negotiations, but he quotes one of the rules of acquisition: never begin a business negotiation on an empty stomach. When he describes the rules of acquisition, she finds them logical and quite reassuring. Once Quark is ready to discuss business, he's surprised to hear she's looking to acquire weapons. She wishes to acquire a continuous supply of guns, phaser banks, photon torpedoes, troop transports, and a number of cobalt thorium devices, among others. You're not like other Vulcans, are you? Quark says. Mm-hmm. In the demilitarized zone of Volan 3, Golovec, the Cardassian attaché to the demilitarized zone, is in heated debate with Kyle Hudson and the colony's council when Dukat and Sisko enter the room. Avec appears to not have been aware of Dukat's involvement. When they describe the incident they observed, both sides seem to feel that their colonists were justified. Avec then produces a confession from the Bacanora saboteur, William Patrick Samuels, but claims that Samuels committed suicide shortly after giving it. One of the colonists present named Amaros attacks Avec and must be restrained. Later that night, Hudson warns Sisko that the Cardassians have no intention of allowing the Federation colonists to stay. He tells him the Bacanora was likely transporting weapons to Cardassian colonists. He concedes that Samuels might have destroyed the freighter, but claims the colonists have the right to defend themselves. Furthermore, the authorities themselves are involved in the conflict, arming their civilians. Sisko says if that's true, the Federation can use diplomatic channels, but Hudson scoffs at that, saying they'll find discreet ways of supplying them. Sisko then mentions the Cardassian supply of weapons to Bajoran extremists, suggesting the Bacanora could have carried the weapons to a third party before it was destroyed at Deep Space Nine. Hudson has to tell Samuel's wife about his death, and briefly reminisces about their time in New Berlin, specifically the fun they and their wives had at the Marzuka festival. Sisko then asks if something bigger is going on, but Hudson says he's not aware. On the way back to Deep Space Nine, Dukat again makes conversation, noting Sisko is quiet now, angry at the reckless actions that will eventually hurt the treaty. Sisko then suggests that Dukat knew of Samuel's confession. Dukat admits it, but says he knew nothing of the suicide. In fact, he told Avec he would be a fool if he let him die as a good interrogator. Furthermore, Dukat swears on the lives of his 7 children that the Bacanora was not transporting weapons, despite the fact that it could have rendezvoused with a third party in order to do so. Back on the station, Sisko gives Dukat quarters and security before he's transported back home. In Ops, O'Brien has confirmed what Sisko believed. The bomb that destroyed the Bacanora was of Federation origin. As Sisko prepares to contact Starfleet, Kira starts a heated argument in his office, as she believes that the Federation should be protecting their own colonists ahead of their treaty with the Cardassians, which she believes will be violated by the Cardassians at every opportunity. Sisko then opens the door to his office, asking Kira to leave. Meanwhile, Sakona requests that Quark move the shipment schedule forward to that night, and he complies greedily. Later on, she and a man posing as the Starfleet security guard subdue the guard posted to Dukat's quarters with a Vulcan nerve pinch. They lead him to an airlock under false pretenses and are joined by Amros and another of the colonists. They kidnap Dukat by rendering him unconscious with the phaser. Sisko and the rest of the crew determined the course the kidnappers most likely took. A Galador freighter left, but Dex confirms the registry was forged, as the Galadorans do not have a ship in the sector. It was heading toward Farius Prime, but they know it is a false route. Just as he, Kira, and Bashir leave Ops to go back to the demilitarized zone, Kira reports an anonymous transition from there attributing the bombing of the Bacanora and the recent kidnappings to a group calling itself the Maquis. On the runabout, O'Brien reports that fortunately Klingon freighter reported the freighter's location. They follow the Maquis into an area called the Badlands, with which Bashir is unfamiliar. Kira explains that it is an area of the Cardassian border with frequent plasma storms, which pilots generally try to avoid. Sounds like the perfect place for hideout, he observes. They beam to the surface of a Class M asteroid, where the armed Maquis members emerge from nearby foliage, followed by Hudson, now out of uniform. Dun dun dun. So let's take a look at the background information with this episode, beginning with story and script. This episode marks the first appearance of the Maquis, whose origins are rooted in the events of the Next Generation episode Journey's End. They later appeared in Preemptive Strike and several more episodes of Deep Space Nine, such as the Michael Eddington arc of For the Cause, For the Uniform, and Blaze of Glory, as well as being featured prominently in Star Trek Voyager. Michael Piller commented, quote, DS9 is the true inheritor of the Maquis, since there was no long-term benefit to Voyager. An early draft for the episode had Jake get involved with an old friend of Sisko's who was now a mercenary. Ira C. Barrett commented, quote, "The way it got started originally was that Jim Crocker and the writing staff, including Michael, decided to do Shane. Don't ask me why." Captain Baudet is referenced for the first time in this episode. It will be mentioned again in Let He Who Is Without Sin, where Sam will cause an argument between Jadzia Dax and Worf. Resurrection and Penumbra, where it will cause an argument between Ezri Dax and Worf. This episode is the first to refer to the Badlands, and Sisko states that a few ships have been lost there, foreshadowing the USS Voyager being transported to the Delta Quadrant by the Caretaker in the episode Caretaker less than a year later. The conversation Sisko has with the Admiral was actually included in the script, even though it was not heard. Now on to the production of the episode. At the suggestion of director David Livingston, costume designer Robert Blackman originally designed a much more revealing outfit for Sakona than seen in the episode. However, when Rick Berman saw it, he told Blackman to tone it back somewhat. Blackman still likes the outfit that Sakona wears, however, as it shows off actress Bertilla Damas's figure and is a much sexier look than ever seen on a Vulcan. And now finally onto some trivia surrounding this episode. Sisko states that the Cardassians were caught shipping weapons through the Iridians, but in the episode early in the season, The Circle, it was found to be the Cressari who were acting as intermediaries. It's unclear whether this was a continuity error, or whether Sisko was simply referring to two separate incidents. Reference Rule of Acquisition number 214. Never begin a negotiation on an empty stomach. This is the second of 3 DS9 appearances for actor Richard Poe as Golovec. He first appeared in Playing God, and will later be seen in Tribunal and the Star Trek The Next Generation episodes Trinity's End and Preemptive Strike, before making his final appearance as Vec in Caretaker, the pilot episode of Star Trek Voyager. The Maquis settlement is a reuse of the map painting used for Tau Cygna 5 in the TNG episode The Instance of Command. Kira Golovkin does not appear in this episode, but Benjamin Sisko asks Kieran Reeves where he is. The first scene of Act 1, when Kira and O'Brien are searching the wreckage of the Bach Nor, Kira is now wearing her Bajoran earring. When Dukat and Benjamin Sisko enter the promenade, having just returned to Deep Space Nine after visiting the demilitarized zone, it is obvious that the chest piece of Dukat's costume has attached itself from the underlying material. The rubber armor even catches a few times in the actor's lower arm as it swings while he walks. In reference to the Badlands, Sisko says in this episode that few ships have been lost there in the past year, which is part of the premise for Star Trek Voyager. Contrary to this, in the Voyager episode State of Flux, when asked about missing Federation ships, Captain Catherine Janeway responds, "Not to my knowledge." That's odd, isn't it? So overall, I think it's a pretty darn good episode, and hey, you know me, I'm a sucker for two-parters, so there you go. So overall, I give the Maquis Part 1 4 warp cores out of 5. Well, anyway, tune in tomorrow as we take a look at the conclusion to this two-parter with the Maquis Part 2. So, until then, live long and prosper, everybody.